Welcome back. Next up, we're going to look at world health trends. Can our social class affect our health, the way that we live? The WHO, the World Health Organization, defines health as a state of complete mental, physical, and social well-being. Basically, in order to be classified as healthy, you need to be able to handle the stress in your life, have a healthy body, and have good relationships with the people around you. Social classes can have a different effect on different people's health. Of course, if you're rich and have more money, you tend to have better access to healthcare. What about those who are poor? Death among children is overwhelmingly a problem in some of the developing countries like Angola, Sierra Leone, Afghanistan, Liberia, Niger, Somalia, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, and so on. Some of the preventable and treatable diseases that kill thousands of children every year include diarrheal dehydration. Basically, some people don't have access to clean water to drink. Acute respiratory infection. This may be due to lack of medicine or pollution. Measles. While most developed countries have cheap, affordable access to vaccines that can prevent this disease, some of these developing countries are not so lucky. Malaria. Although there is a vaccine for malaria, most people don't take it because it's not very effective. Also, people will never know when the malaria mosquito will strike. However, because of hygiene and other environmental issues, many developing countries tend to have a greater problem with malaria compared to developed countries. Next up, we look at maternal health and education. The survival of infants depends critically on the nurturing the mother provides during pregnancy and childhood. An infant is at greater risk if a mother is in her teens or older than 40, if she has given birth more than 7 times, or if the time between the birth is less than 2 years. Children's chances of surviving improve as their mother's education increases. Fertility levels are usually the lowest among the most highly educated women within a country. Now, this brings up the point of how important it is to keep our people, especially the women, educated. As you all may know, it is not easy to take care of a baby. In order to bring up and nurture a healthy baby, the mother must be aware of the procedures required to do so. The baby needs proper nutrients, basically food, and the proper care, basically things like changing a diapers, and how to soothe your baby to sleep, what to do if the baby starts crying, how do you tell if the baby is sick, what are some of the other things that a baby needs. The survival rate of babies will very much affect the population of a country. The way that a society is stratified or segmented is very much influenced by their population. The number of children that a family has will affect and will be affected by the family's lifestyle in both developed and undeveloped countries. Many factors determine the typical family size in a country. If you were to get married and have children in the future, how many children would you want? 1, 2, 3, 5, none? What are some of the factors that affect your decision? And in turn, by making that decision, what kind of impact do you have on society? Now, one of the issues that very much affects our country is the issue of child marriage. To someone who's usually considered to be a child, usually someone under the age of 18 years old. Child marriage began as a way to protect unwelcome sexual advances and to gain economic security. Basically, in the past, some parents would marry their children to someone to ensure that their children is well taken care of in the future, because they might not have the resources to take care of the children. However, that purpose is no longer served today, and child marriage often means the girl will have a life of sexual and economic servitude. The second-class status of women in some countries is both the cause and the result of child marriage. It's undeniable that when a child marries an adult, that child will have no choice but to follow and obey whatever the adult tells him or her to do. This usually results in abuse and sexual violence, and very frequently it leads to the death of the child. Some information regarding the legal ages in Malaysia. According to Malaysian law, a child or a minor is defined by someone under the age of 18. Under law, you are allowed to get a motorcycle license at the age of 16. You are allowed to get a driving license at the age of 17. You are legally allowed to consume alcohol at the age of 21. The legal age for smoking is 18. Previously, the legal age for voting in our general elections was 21, but since 2019, we have passed a law that allows any Malaysian over the age of 18 to vote. In most cases, you are legally allowed to work if you're over the age of 15. The age of consent for sexual intercourse is 16. And in the case of marriage under Malaysian law, you are allowed to get married without your parents' permission if you're 21 and above. For both Muslims and non-Muslims, you are allowed to get married with your parents' permission at the age of 18 or above. If you are aged between 16 and 18, you are allowed to get married, provided you get your parents' permission and approval from the Sharia court or the state chief minister, depending if you're a Muslim or a non-Muslim. However, if you see the news, there have been some cases of Malaysians getting married as young as the age of 13 or 14 years old. This is a major problem because at that age, children don't have the capability to decide something that will affect them for the rest of their life. Here's some statistics on Muslim child marriage applications from 2013 to June of 2018. As you can see, the overall number has somewhat maintained but has dropped slightly over the years. Next, let's have a look at this table showing countries with the highest percentage of women married before the age of 18. The country with the highest percentage of women married before the age of 18 is Nigeria at 76%, followed by the Central African Republic at 68%. And then we have Chad at 67%, Bangladesh at 59%, Mali at 52%, followed by South Sudan, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mozambique, and India. Have a look at the list of countries in this list. Do you find anything in common between them? As you may have observed, most of the countries are from the African continent. The two which are not from Africa, Bangladesh and India, what all these countries have in common is the high levels of poverty. Basically, what we see in common in all of these countries is high levels of poverty and low levels of equal access to education. This results in a low level of gender equality and lack of awareness of women's rights. Poverty and lack of education leads to a higher rate of infant and child mortality. Lower infant and child mortality will lead to somewhat larger families and faster rates of population growth. However, countries with high child mortality rates usually have higher fertility rates. Children in less developed countries with a high poverty rate and lack of access to healthcare tend to die at a much higher rate. Because of this, parents in these countries tend to have more children because the chance of their children surviving is much lower. People with higher incomes want fewer children. This is interesting because when you have more money, you have a greater ability to take care of your children, ensure that they have a good education. But why do you think that rich people want less children? It could be because they want to live a quieter and a more comfortable life by themselves. It could be because they don't want too many children fighting over their wealth. Or maybe they just don't like children. There could be many reasons. Society has changed greatly with the development of technologies that allow for contraception or birth control. Before this, people used to control their family size through abortion, abstinence, or even infanticide. Before this, it was so much more difficult for couples who want to avoid having so many children that they have to resort to taking some drastic measures. Contraception is partly the function of a couple's wish to avoid or delay having children and partly related to costs. Some couples may decide that they do not want to have children, or they might want to have less children, or they might want to have children much later in their life. This is usually due to financial issues. The couple may not be financially stable yet, so they feel that they may not have the ability to raise a child properly. In many countries, the cost of preventing a birth, whether economic, social, or psychological, may be greater than the risk of having another child. The act of delaying or preventing childbirth may have different effects on different people. For some people, it may affect their health. For others, it may affect their mental health. Maybe when they choose to have a child, they are no longer able to do so. Breastfeeding delays the resumption of menstruation and therefore offers limited protection against contraception. Patterns of childbirth is also very much affected by whether you live in the rural area or in the urban or city area. Rural lifestyles that involve farming and herding tend to produce higher birth rates because children are seen as contributing workers. It's not uncommon for farmers to have children and then have them work on the farm. Urban fertility tends to be lower in developing countries than rural fertility. People who live in the city tend to have less children compared to those who live in the rural areas. This may be due to the fact that because of work, they may have less time for kids. People who live in the city, urban dwellers, usually have access to better education and health services, a wider range of jobs, and more avenue for self-improvement and social mobility than their rural counterparts. But they also have a much higher cost of living and other desires. Compared to people who live in the rural areas, people who live in the city tend to have to pay a higher cost for rent, for the basic everyday necessities like food, education. People in the city also tend to have bigger dreams that might cost a lot of money. For example, they might like to travel, go around the world, see different places. All of this adds to the fact that things like education and children's clothing are a lot more expensive in the city, thus making the cost of raising a child a lot more than in the rural areas. Global aging will affect economic growth, savings, investment, and consumption, labor markets, pensions, taxation, and the transfers of wealth, property, and care from one generation to another. This also means that you have an increasing population of elderly, basically people who are above the age of 55. What this does is it creates an entire population of people who doesn't really work, and they need greater access to facilities such as hospitals and care facilities. Let's have a look at this list of countries with the highest aging population. Basically people who are older than the age of 65 years. At 27%, Japan is the country that by far with the highest percentage of aging population above the age of 65. This results in a lower number of people available for work, and it also increases the number of people in need for welfare facilities. Other countries on the list, such as Italy, Portugal, Germany, Finland, Bulgaria, Greece, Sweden, Latvia, Croatia, France, and Denmark maintain about the same percentage, between 20 and 23%. The percentage of aging population in Malaysia remains somewhat low at 6%. What do you think? Is it a good thing that people are living much longer lives? Is our society prepared to take care of this elderly population? What will happen to some of these countries like Japan, China, Korea, Singapore, who want to have less children? Will there be a shortage of people to work in the different industries in our society? What should we do to solve some of these problems? Is it a good idea to bring in foreign workers to fill up job positions that are empty because we don't have enough people to do those jobs? What do you think? And that gives you something to think about. And that brings us to the end of this week's lecture. I hope you learned something interesting about social class, global stratification, and the effects that it has on our society. I'll see you next week.